We're in still in Second Timothy this morning, and this is kind of interesting. Is this pastoral letter, Paul writing to Timothy in Ephesus, things going on there, and how he should handle it. He says Timothy trying to give him encouragement, also give him instruction. Talked about qualification for elders, and here we talk about uh, start to talk about older people and younger people, people within the congregation, and widows, and it kind of gives you an idea of some of the makeup of that church and how they dealt with situations there, and how Paul would have them to deal with that. It says, "Do not sharply rebuke an older man." And that word there, episkopos, is the same word we use for elder, and it can mean elderly. It's the same word we use for that. We talked about that. We started talking about in First Timothy when it uses the word overseers, episkope in the Greek, and that's the word for elder. We see that word for overseer, bishop in the King James. The other word we use for elders sometimes is that word. And then the other word is poimen, shepherd. So poimen, episkope, and presbyteros is the words we use for elder. But then that word here can also mean older man, so it doesn't necessarily mean an elder here. That's why it doesn't say elder, it just says older, but it's actually the same word. Appeal to him as a father, to the younger men as brothers, the older women as mother, and the younger women as sisters, in all purity. It's a family, right? Families. And that's something that has never changed. It was that way at the time of Timothy, and it's that way today. Churches are family, and we're brothers and sisters with one another. And as we age, as we grow older within the church, our role changes, our status changes, just as it does within our own families. Um, when I started going to church here, a long time ago, my brain really isn't working how long ago that was, but about 85. I was a lot younger guy back then. I was in a different state in my life. I didn't have children actually when we first came back to church. Started going back to church. Moved back from Arkansas. Started coming to church here. We went to Walika and we came back. We started going to church in Henrietta, and I didn't even have kids then. So, I've grown up here basically from the time I was a young married person in my young days when I had dark hair and looked a lot better than I did now. I never looked really good, but I did look better than I do now. To the point that I my kids and raised my kids and became a deacon as I got older. My kids became in junior high, high school. I became a deacon here and served in that capacity for a number of years. And then my children eventually, as you know, graduated, moved to college, and moved back, and I'm an old guy now, right? Old gray-haired man. So, I've grown up here. And as I've done that, my role here has changed. A lot of the men that I looked up to as fathers, men that I respected in this congregation, I could give you a lot of names of those men. A lot of them, some of you here would not even know. That's how many years ago it's been. And some of you would know. But those men that I looked up to and respected their opinion, valued them, looked up to them. A lot of those men have passed from this life. A few are still here. And now I'm that older guy, right? So we change. As we do in our families, we change in the church. But we should have respect for each other at any place in that journey, whether we're younger women or mothers or grandmothers or young men or teens or, middle-aged men or older men. As we change, our roles change in the church. We should mature as Christians. We should mature in this family, and we should have respect for each other. That's what Paul's saying. Refer to the older men as fathers. That's a term of endearment. It's not a term of disrespect, but it's a term of endearment. The older women as mothers. It's a term of endearment, is what Paul's saying. And in the church, that's how we should be. This society we live in doesn't respect the elder. It doesn't respect our elders anymore. We don't have respect for the elderly that other societies have and that we did in this country years ago. And I believe that's true. But in the church, that shouldn't be the case. We should treat our elders with respect. We should honor them, and we should, and not only that, but we should use terms that are endearing to each other, brothers and sisters, in all purity, Paul says, with all good intent. Honor widows who are widows indeed. And Paul, there's a reason that he says this. The church, there was no Social Security, there was no whatever, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever all these programs are in the world today to take care of people. So the church did, and we see that in Acts chapter 6 when he said, choose those deacons to care for the widows, to bring them their meals. So they relied upon the church, and the church supported them. And this is a real early example of church ministry. But Paul here says they need to be widows indeed. And he's going to put stipulations on this because it's something that's getting abused. And people are, they're supporting people that maybe they shouldn't be supporting. And so Paul's going to put some stipulations on who's a widow indeed. Does this still apply to us? Not really. I don't think that in our society it's as big a deal as it was in this time. We had to kind of read this through first century eyes, understand the situation of those, and especially widows, because they, women in that society didn't have any empowerment. It's not like our society. They didn't have the ability without a husband to do a lot of things, maybe even to own property or to pursue a job. Those are things that weren't available. So women were at the mercy of society, at the mercy of the church, at the mercy of the temple, if they were Jewish women. And we see that in the case of Anna, who was a temple widow, who stayed in the temple and ate from the temple and cared for the temple and did those things. So they had to find a means. You see that all throughout the Bible, don't you? Ruth and Naomi, the same idea, where she didn't have any means of support. Naomi didn't have any means of support, and Ruth had to support her, and they gleaned from the field because even though her husband had property, she couldn't possess it because she wasn't a man. So it was different, and that's how come you don't see men on this list, because that wasn't really the case. It was caring for the widows. Widows indeed. And so Paul put stipulation, and he also says that families should take care of themselves as much as that's possible. And that really means a lot to me. We have a responsibility within our own family to care for one another. And God puts that upon us. To make some return for their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. So Paul says, if you've got family, they need to step up. It's not the church's responsibility. Do families always step up? No, obviously not. But Paul's saying that's the ideal, right? Families should help care for one another, support each other, not just emotionally, but financially. Families have a responsibility. Are there any comments? Y'all can jump in here anytime you want. And so he says, if that's not the case, if she's a widow indeed, in other words, she doesn't have children to take care of her, she doesn't have family that will take care of her, she's left alone, she's fixed her hope on God and continues in entreaties and prayers night and day. So Paul says a faithful woman. But she who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. And that's one reason he kind of stipulates this for older. He says younger women that are widows, they have the ability to remarry, the ability to do things, support themselves. So the church isn't necessarily entitled to have to take care of them. But widows that don't have that ability, that's where the church needs to step in at this particular junction. He's in 8, he reiterates that if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So very strong words, for us to care for our elderly, to care for our parents. Honor your father and mother, the first commandment with a promise, right? And I've said before, I don't think honoring your father and mother just means to provide for them financially. It means it's your attitude towards your parents. What's your attitude towards your parents, towards your grandparents, if that's the case? To honor them, to hold them up, to care for them. That's a responsibility that we have. And apparently there's a list so that they take care of in this congregation. Not less than 60, having been the wife of one man. Interesting terminology there. Same exact terminology it's used when we talk about elders. Does it mean the same thing here contextually? Um, Probably not. Uh, and I think there's a connotation for that. I think that the idea here is that if she's been married more than once, there's probably more means of support involved here. Um, I think it's just a economic type thing. What's the case with this woman? So, I think it's one of those things to examine. The church needs to examine them. What kind of woman is this? A good reputation, brought up children, or she has sown hospitality to strangers, washed the saints' feet. She has assisted those in distress and devoted herself to every good work. So he says, the church, Paul's really big about this, right? If you don't work, you don't eat. It's kind of the same idea here. They're looking for these women. If the church is going to support these women, they need to be faithful Christians, devoted to the Lord, devoted to the church, devoted to those things that are important. So Paul's putting the stipulation upon this here. When the church supports, the church can only support so many people. The more it supports, the less it's able to support them well. Paul's certainly not saying don't take care of people who need it, but Paul's saying take care of people who really deserve to be taken care of. That's kind of goes against us a little bit, doesn't it, in Christianity? We got this idea that to care for everybody, and somebody comes in the door, and we need to do all we can to help them. And people hold that against us a lot of times, but Paul's pretty explicit about this. To help those. How do y'all think about this? I'm open for comments here. Y'all can speak up anytime. Yeah, we say that, right? Help those who help themselves. Help those. Don't cast your pearls before swine, Jesus says, right? What does that mean, cast your pearls before swine? They don't care, right? There's got to be something there, right? Something. Benevolence is the hardest thing on earth to do in a church. Hardest, absolutely the hardest thing to do is benevolence. Um, who do you help? How much do you help? When do you not help? Uh, how does that reflect upon us as a congregation? How those are such hard questions. If you've never done benevolence work, you just can't understand it. I mean, it's just hard to understand. But it's so difficult to be in charge of helping people with the Lord's money. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Well, yeah, you certainly don't ever want anyone to go hungry. And this church has always been 100% about food. We give food to everybody that asks. We've always been that way. Um, but people ask for a lot of things. People ask for money all the time, for bills, for rent, for uh, the gas to go to a loved one's funeral, for people who come by and break down that can't get to the next town. You just have no idea how many people ask for help. And when you're in that situation, it's a hard place to be. Yeah, go ahead, Sherry. Well, I think what it means is that younger widows have the ability or will probably get remarried. And I think that was what Paul was saying here. They have that ability to remarry, to get back underneath. And, they're, in other words, they're probably not going to remain widows. I think that's what Paul's saying. They're probably going to remarry. If they have that desire to remarry, if that's within them, then they shouldn't be put on the list because they're going to receive another support. Yeah. But once they get on that list, basically what Paul's saying, once you put them on that list and they and you're supporting them, but then they get involved in a relationship and remarry, then they've set aside their pledge because part of the pledge to put them on there is that they're going to remain a widow, they're going to help the church, they're going to do all these things. In other words, the church is going to support them, but they're also basically going to be doing work of the church at the same time. So in other words, it's not just a blind type support here. You understand what I'm saying? There's responsibility. They're expected to do certain things in the churches. This is not talking about people who are unable. This is talking about people in that society. Men died early. A lot of times, married men married women way younger than they were. So the men would die. The women would be widows for a long period of time. They could still be a fairly young woman and be a widow in that society, especially. So they would remarry. This is the case where they're just saying we're not going to do that. We're going to devote ourselves to the church, and the church is going to support us. And we're going to do this. So that was kind of the idea. Yeah. Oh yeah. We ask them 100 questions, and we get took all the time. I'm just being honest. Yeah, we ask them 1,000 questions, and we get took all the time. Yeah, I could give you 100 stories of when I've messed up giving money to people and got taken, and yeah, I can tell you 1,000 times. So people can be pretty smooth when they want money for sure, and people see churches as a really good avenue to get that. And churches of Christ, we're probably more vulnerable because we're autonomous congregations. We don't communicate. And I'll tell you one story. Years ago, it's been so long ago, I can tell you the story, but it was in Walika, and I was going to church in Walika then, and a guy came in one night. He had said he's going to this funeral for his son. I can't remember, son, grandson, or something had died, and he was in the military. They generally throw that in. He was in the military, and he just was going to go to Dallas. Had to get down. The funeral was in the morning, and he just didn't have enough gas, and he had to get down there to this funeral. And Doyle was in there, and Doyle. Doyle's heart was bigger than he was. And Doyle's back in the foyer, and of course there wasn't many of us. And Doyle says, and so I told Doyle, and I was pretty young. I had to just been in early 20s, and probably 21, 20, 21. And I told Doyle, even at that time, I said, Doyle, let's just take him down here and fill his tank up so we can get to Dallas. Well, Doyle, So Doyle reaches in, gets his wallet, and gives him, I don't know, $100 or something. And I didn't think much more about it, but there was a gospel meeting going on here. So the next night we was over here, and it was the old building when the foyer was back here. And we come to this gospel meeting, and lo and behold, the same guy walks in the door with the same story, you know. And Riley was in there, And so I told Riley, I said, Riley, I said, this guy was in Walika last night, supposed to be at a funeral today, same story. And so Riley taught me a lesson, right? And so Riley, he says, well, he says, tell you what I'll do. You remember Riley, right? If you do Riley, he says, tell you what I'll do. He says, you come down here in the morning, and you clean this bus and this van up, and we'll pay you for cleaning it up. You know, so he didn't give him anything, but he didn't really say no at the same time. Of course, the guy never showed up, right? But I'm just telling you, people, when you're in charge of it, it's so difficult when people ask you and ask the church, and they look at you as Christians, and yet sometimes it's just an unbelievable situation you walk into. Within the church is easy. Brothers and sisters we know, if they need help, that's easy. That's not even. That's like Gary said, and Brent will tell you the same thing. That's not it. That's a no-brainer. You know, if somebody in this church, one of our brothers or sisters needs help, that's a no-brainer. We're gonna do that. That's not even a thing. But it's all those people who you don't know and who use you that that do that. We had a guy call one time here 4 or 5 years ago. Called the building, said they were moving to Henrietta. Members of the church moving to Henrietta. We're renting a house down on so and so street. Address. Going to work so and so company. This is on a Saturday, right? Saturday or Sunday, and just don't quite have enough gas to get there. We just need $200 or $300 to get to town. So we're doing our due diligence, right? One of our elders, not even going to go into who it is. They're doing their due diligence. They call the person that rents the house. Is that house for rent? Yeah, that house. I'm going to rent that house out. Called the place. That place existed. They were going to go to work. Of course, they weren't open. Couldn't verify if they were going to go to work there or not. Right? Did everything he could to try to make sure their story was right and that he was doing the right thing. Send him. So he sends them the money. The whole thing was a scam. The whole thing was a scam. You know? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I have a time or two in the end, but yeah. Yeah. Oh, I agree. There's a blessing, and yeah, for sure. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 Hmm. But I think Paul's saying, I think if you take the whole idea, he's saying be cautious, use your money wisely, give the money wisely. If you help somebody that's taking you, you don't have the money to help somebody that really needs help. So I mean, I think there's a wisdom. And I always tell people within the church, and I'm not really good at this, but I will tell you something I encourage you. If you really know somebody that really needs help and you desire to help them personally, sometimes it's a good idea to do that through the eldership, do that through the church. Even if you're going to do it, to go to the elders and say, I want to help this person, I want to give money to this person, but I want to do it through the church. Vet it through the church a little bit. It's sometimes a good way to do that. And kind of take yourself off the front line of it a little bit, Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Sure. Right. This is definitely inside the church. And inside the church, it's different for sure. Don't let them learn to be idle, gossips, busybodies. That's the thing. He wants them to be involved, stay involved with the church. Uh, he wants younger widows to get married, which kind of goes with what he says in Corinthians, that if they decide to be single, to stay single. But in this case, he's wanting them to have support. If a woman who is a believer has dependent widows, she must assist them, and the church must not be burdened, so that it may assist those who are widows indeed. So once again, he brings back that widows indeed and puts some stipulations on that. So that kind of gets through a little bit of that idea. The elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor. Here we're talking about the office of elders. Same word, presbyteros, but the office of elders, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. So, elders that are preachers, elders that are teachers, to be worthy of double honor. So this talks about the support of elders. We don't pay any of our elders here. A lot of churches do pay elders. It's certainly scriptural to do that, at least to reimburse their expenses. I guess if a minister was an elder and received pay, this would probably cover that. Do not receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. So basically, that's an Old Testament idea. 2 or 3, same idea we hear in Scripture. We use all the time about Jesus being there if 2 or 3 are gathered in the name, but that's all really about accusations and judgment, not about necessarily the presence of God. And that's an Old Testament idea. You could never condemn someone under the law under one witness. You had to have 2 or 3. Those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so the rest will be fearful of sinning. That's a public rebuke here, not a private rebuke. Charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, chosen angels, maintain those principles without bias, doing nothing in the spirit of partiality. And that really gets into what James says. Don't be partial of people. Don't do something for one over another within the body. This is within the church. This is not outside of the church, within the church. Laying hands, we see that in the Bible, Acts chapter 13. The idea, and what that means is giving credence to something, giving your blessing upon it, laying your hands upon it, putting your blessing upon a person. Or in the Bible, a lot of times it's not necessarily laying on of hands to impart a gift, but it's a laying on of the hands to impart responsibility or to give your blessing upon what a person is doing, to lay your hands upon them, is what we're talking about here. Paul says don't do that too hastily. In other words, you should know the people that you're endorsing to do things. Otherwise, there could be a condemnation for you. It could be a sin against you if you do that. So, when you give somebody the blessing, or basically that's what that means, to put your hands upon them, to put them forth to the work. Do that. Don't do that hastily. Know the people that you're giving that ability to, or that charge to. Don't do that hastily. Or it could be a sin on your part for doing that too quickly. So we have a responsibility involved in that. And then it says not to, and this is a passage we chew along a lot, 23. No longer drink water exclusively. Use a little wine for the sake of your stomach, your frequent ailments. There's been a ton of discussion about that verse. I think it just means what it says. Apparently, Timothy was a water exclusively guy. That's what I get out of this. Timothy was not a guy to drink anything other than water. In that society, I guess that was probably the drink, right? It was water or some sort of a fermented drink. Wine doesn't necessarily mean fermented here. It could mean grape juice. There's no way to make that distinction in this particular passage. Same word. So there's no way to make that distinction. But I don't know that water necessarily was that healthy for you in that time. Medicinal purposes, some people say. I don't know. I think if we lived in the days of Timothy, we would probably understand this better than we do, but we don't. So I don't think we have context for exactly what Paul was saying here. But it was that idea of, I think the one thing I do get out of it is that Timothy, either because of a vow, Nazarite type vow, to abstain from the grape, abstain from the vine, or whether it was a decision that Timothy made, apparently he only drank water. Paul says, listen, sometimes that's not good for you, right? Sometimes you need to have something because of your ailments. What ailments those were, we don't know what they were. Stomach problems, I would suggest. I don't know. But sometimes I think we spend too much time on that. We don't know the answer. The sins of some men are quite evident. Their sins follow after. Deeds that are good are quite evident and otherwise cannot be concealed. Look at people, judge people by their works, by their deeds, by what they do. Slaves and masters, especially when they're their brothers. Philemon, the book of Philemon deals with this. Two Christians, one's a master, one's a slave. That relationship. So Paul not only talks about relationships in the church between elders and youngers, older and younger, but also talks about relations between slaves and masters. They would probably went to the same congregation, wouldn't they? The slave and the master would have been in the same congregation. So, how do they treat each other, right? Doesn't get into the moral or ethical aspects of right or wrong, but just basically says treat each other as Christians, regardless of your status. Paul's big on that, whether you're slave or free, male or free now, right? Rich or poor, to treat within the Lord, within the body, we're to treat each other with respect. We're to treat each other with honor, regardless of our position. That's how we're to treat each other. Teach these principles. Don't go to a different teaching. Does not agree with sound words. So it's just that idea of being good to one another, treating one another with respect, whether it's within helping them financially, whether it's within the way that we talk or address people, within the church, whether we're rich or poor, whatever our status is in life, whatever our health status is, whatever our mental status is, that we treat each other with respect and with dignity and honor. And I think that's universal throughout all time. How we treat each other within our family, within this body, it's universal. How we should be to each other, and I believe within this church we're so good at this, and I'm so thankful that it's like it is. I'm so thankful that we're a family here. And I think that a lot of ways, the way you treat each other exemplifies exactly what Paul's saying here. Treat each other with respect, treat each other with dignity, to honor each other above ourselves. That is how we should be as Christians within the church. And unfortunately, in Ephesus, maybe that wasn't the case. But I think here it is. So good words for us to live by. Are there any comments before we close? Thanks for your time this morning.